Part 11, Chapter 21. Terry and Hale were hurrying down the slope, Hale nearly outrunning his flashlight beam as Terry moved through the dark behind him. "Don't walk there!" Terry shouted as Hale's boots crunched on terrain that sounded like stepped-on cornflakes. "Don't walk where?" Hale asked. "On that black earth." He slowed, shined the light down. "The stuff that looks like burnt toast." "That's cryptogamic soil," Terry said. "It's very fragile. One footprint takes centuries to repair." Hale stopped, stepped onto the rocks that lay alongside the path, and continued down. "That's a new one," he said. "Endangered dirt." Upon reaching the truck, Hale stood by the hood. Now that he wasn't moving, he became very chilly very fast, especially along his back and armpits, where perspiration was locked into his flight suit. Terry reached into the open driver's window and picked up the microphone. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. He nodded once. Terry clicked it on. "Clyde," she said. "Are you there?" "Terry," he said. "Where the hell you been?" "I found the pilot," she said. "Had a tough time. He's unconscious. I'm bringing him in." "Hurt bad?" Clyde asked. "I can't tell," Terry said. "Get an ambulance. I should be there in 20 minutes. "You got it," Clyde said. Terry clicked off, seemed proud of herself. "I improvised the ambulance bit." "Nice touch," Hale agreed. "So," she said, "the game plan is I bring you—" Hale hushed her with a raised hand. They both stood still for a moment, and then Terry heard it too. "Come on!" Hale yelled, grabbing her hand and pulling her back towards the trail as the Blackhawk, its lights off, came diving at them from a cloud. The chopper's two M60 side-firing machine guns sparked to life, chewing holes in the truck, side and top, and sending glass in one side and out the other. Terry heard a thuck, duller than the rest, suspected that they were probably the gas tank, then knew it for sure a second later as the truck exploded. She felt the heat of the blast on the back of her neck, heard Hale swear as they sprinted up the trail. "We've got to hide," he said after the string of oaths. "Is there a cave or a tunnel, anything?" "Follow me," she said. They leaped to the west, off the trail and into a wooded area as the helicopter bore down on them. "We've got to get up that slope," Terry said. She pointed to a long stone cliff some 20 feet high, sloped like a playground slide, with vertical rivulets and notches cut by aeons of freezing and expanding ice. Hale looked back as the chopper bore down on them, its searchlights on now, seeking them out. "Then I suggest we hurry," he said, pulling her ahead. They scrambled up the cold, dry face of the cliff, Terry digging in her rubber-soled boots and getting a firmer grip than her companion. "Come on!" she said, holding onto a jutting rock halfway up and extending her hand towards Hale. Terry helped him to her side, after which she sidled up along a jagged, diagonal split in the surface. Hale was a pace behind her, their way lit by the lights from the Blackhawk. Though the machine guns churned, the intervening trees protected them from the fire. Upon reaching the top, Terry flopped down and scuttled ahead. Hale finished climbing, dropped to his belly, and looked around. He couldn't see a rock, a tree, or her. "Hide where?" he cried as he surveyed the dark, flat terrain. "There isn't even a goddamn—" "Come on!" Terry shouted again from somewhere ahead. The zing of bullets against a nearby rock sent Hale forward, though he still wasn't sure where he was headed. "I can't see you!" he yelled. This way! What way? He shouted back, just before he disappeared. Now that he saw, or rather fell, into what Terry had been talking about, Hale felt like a Beijing opera acrobat he'd once seen. The acrobat had been lying flat on a diving board when another man jumped on the end and somersaulted off. His leap caused the board to spring, which flung the other man up, making him somersault off the end. He went over 3 or 4 times in a tight ball before landing on the shoulders of the first man, who had reached the ground a moment before him. The only difference between that and this was that there was no diving board, no other man, and Hale wasn't an acrobat. Also, the Chinese acrobat hadn't hit rock after rock on the way down. Hale had crawled off the edge of a crevice and tumbled in, butt over head over butt. When he finally stopped rolling 15 feet and many bruises later, he was sitting on deep sand. Terry touched his aching shoulder. It was too dark to see her. "Are you okay?" she asked. "My day," he said, "is complete." "Sorry about that. I thought you'd see where I went." "It's all right," he said, rising. His joints popped and fluttered like party favors. "At least I didn't scream or yell, 'Whoa, Nelly!' or anything embarrassing." "Can you walk?" Terry asked. "Been doing it since I was a kid," he replied. "Then follow me. This way," she said, taking his hand and leading him through a labyrinth of high, tight fissures. Above them, the chopper beat a low, angry course back and forth, its lights playing over the fissures. "Where are we?" Hale asked. "It's called the Joint Trail," she said. "It's a flatland crisscrossed by a grid of deep fissures." She went to the right, continued at a fast walk for nearly a minute, then cut to the left. The helicopter was no longer on top of them. "How the hell can you see anything?" Hale asked. "Hey," she said, "I'm a park ranger. I told you, this is my house. I know every corner of—" Terry stopped suddenly, and Hale walked into her. His chin struck the back of her head, and he stepped back, rubbing it. "What's wrong?" he asked. Terry stood there for a moment, then said, "I hit my damn head." "On what?" "On a wall. I should have cut right, not left back there. This is a dead end." "You all right?" "Yeah," she said. "Just promise me something." "Sure." "Don't tell anyone I did that." Hale chuckled. "I'm eyes only cleared," he said. "I can keep a secret." "Good," she said. Terry squeezed around him and doubled back. Then she went down the fissure to the right. This path sloped slightly and passed through an area with an overhead ledge. Flopping against the wall, Terry said, "We'll be safe here. He can't see us." Hale stepped away from the wall and looked up. She was right about that. Whatever had cut these fissures had slashed this one diagonally. The only way they could be seen was if someone were standing to the left or right of them. Hale was way out of his element here. He felt like Rick Marshall in Land of the Lost, going over a waterfall and ending up in a prehistoric world of geologic oddities and giant flying monsters. All that was missing was the monkey boy Chaka. He was about to sit down and rest his battered limbs when the ground shook and an explosion stormed his ears and chest cavity. "Hale!" Terry screamed. A second and then a third explosion pummeled them. "What is it?" she shouted as soil fell on them, followed by chunks of rock and sod. Hale thought for a moment, back to the cargo they'd been carrying. "Grenades!" he rasped. "He's dropping grenades on the trail, trying to bury us." Though the chopper wasn't above them, a large section of ledge dropped down a few feet to Hale's right. Hale said, "Is there anywhere we can climb out?" "To the left," she said. "The fissure ends, but it's not as steep as the other one." "Then move it," he said, pushing her ahead as the grenades landed closer and the walls on both sides shook violently. Chapter 22. The end of the fissure was as dark as absolute night, and touching it, Hale found the wall far steeper than he had imagined. "Are you going to be able to climb out?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It zigzags up, and there are a lot of footholds. But he'll see me." "I'm counting on it," Hale said. He asked for the gun, and then told her what he wanted her to do. Terry protested that would show the chopper exactly where they were, just as a grenade exploded less than 20 yards behind them. Only a bend in the fissure protected them from the blast. "If we stay here, he's going to get us eventually," Hale said. "Now go!" With a boost from Hale to the first foothold, she began climbing the fissure wall. It took less than a minute for her to reach the top, propelled by an explosion that was nearer by half than the last one. Upon reaching the surface, Terry held up her hands and ran towards the white circle of the chopper's floodlight. The Black Hawk swiveled around, facing her, then descended and approached slowly. "This has nothing to do with me!" Terry yelled. "I want out!" The pilot, Novacek, leaned his head from the window. "Fair enough! Tell me where he is, and I'll let you go!" Terry lowered one arm and pointed towards the wrong fissure. "In there!" she shouted. In order to reach the fissure, the helicopter would have to cross over the place where Hale really was. Pulling his head into the cockpit, Novacek dropped the chopper even lower and moved on his target. In the fissure, Hale held his back against the wall, his arms raised, the gun pointed straight up. The nose of the helicopter moved into view just 20-odd feet up. "Black Hawk UH-60A," he was muttering as the forward part of the cockpit edged over the rim of the fissure. "In '87, they moved the pilot seat back about a foot." He stared along the barrel at the front sight as the cockpit moved directly overhead. "That puts him right about here." In the 12 years he'd been in the military, Hale had never shot at anyone. Not that he'd had anything against it. The opportunity simply hadn't presented itself. Now that it was here, the feeling of power was major. This was an uppercut that, if it landed, was going to smart. His mouth open, right eye shut, Hale squeezed off all 6 shots as the chopper glided over. It seemed to Hale as if the Black Hawk itself were alive. Somewhere in the middle of the fuselage, the helicopter listed sideways and simultaneously began to drop. "Got him!" Hale roared. Above, Terry also shook a fist and gave a little cheer as the helicopter rolled over and began to fall. But her joy was short-lived as it suddenly angled forward, nose down, diving right at her, as though the pilot had fallen against the control stick, pushing it forward. The chopper was still on its side, the rotor spinning perpendicular to the ground. "Shit!" she screamed, scrambling across the flatland towards the fissure. She literally dove in, stiffening her arms and legs and bracing herself between the 2 sides of the fissure, sagging like a clothesline in an alleyway. She looked up as the rotor hit the top of the fissure, smashing and grinding against the rock. The collision caused the blades to bend and stop spinning, but the torque of the powerful turbo shaft caused the 16,000-pound helicopter to twist and rotate as if it were a giant blade. The tail swung up and over in a high arc, the 4 blades of the tail rotor spinning like a buzzsaw, heading right for the fissure. Terry wasn't sure how far she was from the bottom of the fissure, but she knew that if she stayed where she was, she'd be falling in 2 pieces instead of 1. Letting go, she folded her arms around her head and tucked in her legs, landing on the sands an instant before the tail rotor slashed down through the fissure. Though her upper chest, arms and shoulders hurt where she hit, she managed to uncurl herself and spread out flat. She could hear the tail section descending, kind of liked the fact that her last word had been shit, and waited for the death stroke. She felt the knifing wind from the blades, heard the deafening chug of the motor, but nothing happened. She lay there for several seconds, heard rocks cracking, felt the wind come closer, and then realized that the tail section was wedged in the fissure. "Terry!" Hale yelled. She squinted into the darkness, couldn't see anything other than the sands being vacuumed up and about by the rotor. "Terry! Worm over! Hurry!" Strong fingers tugged at her hand. Her legs were bent to the side, and she pushed forward, following the hand ahead. "Come on!" Hale said. He grabbed her by the wrists and pulled her forward. She helped, using the sides of her feet, and was in his arms and backing away from the rotor as it fell the last few feet to the ground. The smell of fuel was in the air, the noise deafening as the slowing blades clanged against rock and batted up clouds of sand. Hale continued to back away from the choking storm, Terry in his arms, as the rotor chipped sparks from the rocks. They landed in a puddle of leaking fuel, and a moment later, the dark fissure flashed orange. Hale threw himself on top of Terry as the fuel ignited. Flames shot up to the gas tank, and the helicopter exploded.